ICQ Podcast episode 321, Why Coax Fails. Well, hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts. Welcome to this, our 321st episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast. Supported by Dean Sproul, Victor Echo 5, Sierra Papa Romeo, and of course our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M0MNG is joined by Leslie Golf 0, Charlie India Bravo, Edmund Mike 0, Mike November Golf, Dan Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, and Ruth Kilo Mike 4 Lima Alpha Oscar to discuss latest amateur ham radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a feature asking why does Coax fail? Now, of course, during these worrying global times, we've had a think about what we wanted to do for the show this episode, and we've decided to run a normal show and to remove the COVID-19 corona flu information to icqpodcast.com. This was taken with the mindset of the fact that I'm sure a lot of people have been bombarded with a lot of news information from various mainstream news outlets, and we wanted to try and give you a show at this time which is more amateur radio based rather than necessarily topping up some of the news you're hearing elsewhere. So details regarding events etc that are being affected by say the global pandemic this time will be published on icqpodcast.com, so make sure you update to our newsletter which is free of charge and doesn't contain any commercial advertising, and say to keep up to date with what's going on just by visiting icqpodcast.com. Now, of course, it's our donors that always keep us advert free on the ICQ podcast, and I'm a great pleasure to welcome a new donor to the show, Dean Sproul, I think it's pronounced, from Canada, VE5 Sierra Papa Romeo, and he says he enjoys listening to the podcast, and I was trying to isolate himself at the moment, and what a better time to be a ham, who's one who's used to isolation. Hi. So he said, cheers and be safe to you and all the family and the listening family out there as well. So Dean, we certainly echo your sentiments to all listeners to the ICQ podcast. Guys, be safe, enjoy the hobby, etc. at this time, and thank you, Dean, for your kind donation. Now, as I say, Dean's donation, along with our monthly and subscription donors, they keep us advert free, and all you have to do to show your value for the show is to visit www.icqpodcast.com, where you can send your value to the show from the donation page, and everything that we get certainly helps us pay our costs and our running costs. It's very interesting that other podcasts are struggling for advertising at this time, all being pulled out, and all the our podcasts complain about lack of revenue, but as I say, we know we have a base of very kind donors that help us pay our way, so we're going to keep going along those ways. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to join Martin, Leslie, Edmund, Dan and Ruth to discuss latest amateur radio news, including scientists create a spectrum sensor that covers the entire radio frequency spectrum, along with time for remote amateur radio exams. As always, guys, really hope you enjoy and keep safe.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, hi guys, welcome to episode 321 of the ICQ Podcast, and tonight's news roundtable for that episode. Tonight we have Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB. Hi Leslie.
Good evening, Martin. Good to be on the show again.
Certainly good to have you. I hope you're not going to do any more scientific experiments or anything like that today, you know?
No, I'll behave. That's a sort of promise.
Yeah? There's sort of a promise, yeah. Okay. I've also got Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hi, mate. Good to have you on. And following on, we're going to scoot the other side of the pond to Mr. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Hello, everybody.
And good to have you on, Dan. Dan's call sign KB6NU. And we were getting ourselves, well, I was getting myself lost in where call signs should be. And Dan was putting me right earlier, so that's coming up soon, but all good fun. And last but not least, we have Ruth back with us this time. Ruth Willet, KM4LAO. Hi, Ruth.
Hello, everyone. Great to be back.
Yeah, good to have you back. And as I say, things are looking good. So, unfortunately, we're not going to meet up with you in Dayton this year. But real shame on that one. Was looking forward to that. Well, Colin and I decided that we would try not to depress you too much with stories on the coronavirus. So hopefully we've got interesting stories that are radio related that are not going to depress you too much. So let's move on to our first one. First news story. It's way over, I think, my head, and some of the other presenters have said this, but we'll try and do it justice. Scientists have created a quantum sensor that covers the entire radio frequency spectrum. And then I started reading and it talked about military and lasers and all that sort of thing. I thought, oh, this is good. Then I quickly checked my diary to realise that it isn't April the 1st. So if somebody's released an April the 1st one early, I've been suckered. But it looks interesting. I'm going to pass this one to Ruth first. Ruth, what do you think?
I mean, I love physics. I love pretty much anything quantum related is just very fascinating to read about. Definitely seems like a really cool project, and I guess since they released an article about it, it seems to be working for now, at least in the lab. Gotta admit, it's still a little bit over my head. We didn't quite get this far when I was doing quantum mechanics last term at school, but it's an aspect, an application that I hadn't exactly considered before. So I'm going to be looking more into it, and I'm very curious to learn more about it and see what develops.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I think it's interesting. I was trying to work out what it is. It's effectively a detector, and you with atoms in it, and you fire a laser down through it, and it picks up radio waves and modulates the radio waves onto the laser, from what I understand. Well, that's my understanding anyway, Dan. You got any better ideas on this one?
So I've been quickly trying to study up on this since we got started here, and you're right. So I understand it a little bit more now. So they somehow get these what they call Rydberg atoms, and if they shoot a laser through it, the laser gets, like you say, it's kind of a mixer. It mixes the radio wave with the light wave, and then the laser light wave, and then somehow they've got to be able to sort of figure out the spectrum of the radio wave from the light modulation. That's the best I can come up with. So the fact that they can get the atoms to do that to the laser, that's like one problem. But then getting the information from the laser has got to be quite a engineering feat as well. So, but yeah, it's got a heck of a bandwidth, that's for sure.
Yeah, it certainly has. And as I was saying to you earlier, we were saying, well, you might be able to have this one little detector unit, but think of the processing you've got to do behind it. And I remember back in the 1980s, early 1980s, I was working on optical character recognition. And in them days, you'd have effectively an optical character recognition system that would cover the ground floor of most people's houses. You know, it was that big. Today, you can pretty much do it on a chip and stick it in a tablet. So processing power and all those sort of things are increasing. So I think they're doing the front end. The back end might take a little while to catch up, but could be interesting. Edmund, what do you think?
Well, at the risk of surprising anybody, quantum engineering is not one of my hobbies or a subject that I'm particularly knowledgeable about. The article describes it as a receiver, so the only thought I can come up with is what kind of antenna would you need to feed it, and if the receiver covers basically DC to light, then that's an enormous bandwidth. The signal to noise ratio and the amount of QRM that it would pick up would be huge, I would have thought. So how this works, or how you would feed it with an antenna, assuming an antenna is necessary, goes way above my head. My brain hurts. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, they do feed it with an antenna. And yes, it's experimental, but they reckon it's almost, as you say, DC to 100 gigahertz is what they're experimenting with at the moment. But phenomenal stuff. Now, Leslie, you said when you were in the military, you only did Klansman.
We had, yes, Klansman kit. It was like, and we did A41s before that, and they were backbreakers, and the batteries were so heavy. Oh, I'm thinking about it, and I've got to be honest. This is way over my head. I really don't understand it. Oh dear. But saying that, Ruth, can you tell me where my cat's gone? Over to you, Martin.
Is he misbehaving, Ruth, again?
Something like that.
Yeah, you'll have to let me in on it later. And hopefully, Leslie, remember we have a clean rating.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on to our next news story. It's time for remote amateur radio license exam. And Dan, you kind of alerted me to this. Sterling Coffee, is it, or Sterling Man, was raised a blog post on this, and you pointed me to it. So over to you first, Dan.
Yeah, so like I say, I think it's time has come for this kind of thing. We've had one VEC out of all 14 here in the U.S. that's been doing remote testing. And the ARRL has actually done a remote testing for people down in Antarctica. But, with the West situation the way it is, I think it's probably time we start thinking about it, doing it more frequently and more often. And there's been a big, Sterling blogged about this. I've blogged about it. And we've generated quite a Twitter discussion about this. And the reason for it, of course, is that we're getting this question, where can I take a test now? And if we had remote testing, then we'd be able to do it. Otherwise, we just have to tell these folks, well, I don't know, and we don't know when we'll be able to start again.
Yeah, but isn't the one group that said, no way, Jose?
Oh, yeah. So there's that aspect, too. Probably the largest VEC in the U.S. is the ARRL, but probably number two is either W5YI or Laurel. And Laurel has come out and said, no way, we're never going to do this. And to me, that's kind of short-sighted. But I think they'll probably end up changing their mind if we keep pushing on them a little bit.
Yeah, well, you can never say never. Let's be honest about it. They said that you guys can have HF because it's never going to be any good. And look at it.
All right. So didn't you guys experiment with this a little bit in the UK?
There is talk about us doing online exams, and we covered a little bit. Chris was a bit upset because the information didn't come to him as the exam secretary. We can do online exam, but they still have to be done they still have to be done in an exam environment, so exactly like a paper.
I see.
But
I see.
With people there, but the only difference is they got a laptop on their desk instead of a question paper, as I understand it.
Yeah. Well, so then the other point about all this is currently there's a lot of actually online testing going on, even for very critical occupations. But even FCC testing, the general radio operator's license, can be now taken online. So it's like, well, why can't ham radio operators do that as well?
Yeah, well, as long as they stop the cheating or any cheating and that, I have no problems with that. And as I say, putting a camera to watch people is a good one. there's always going to be somebody who tries to think of a way around some of these things, and I can think of some ways around it, and I'm not going to publish on here how I think you could break the system. But in fairness, you've got to move with the time.
And I think that and I don't, maybe I'm wrong about this, but the number of people that will really cheat, I think is going to be pretty small. And who are they really cheating? They're just cheating themselves anyway, right?
Exactly the same when we have foundation license holders running 100 watts when they're only supposed to run 10. Okay, they're not causing interference necessarily, but they're just cheating themselves.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So, Edmund, okay, you're not in the States, but what do you think about remote testing? Maybe sitting at home and doing your exam?
Well, I absolutely agree with everything that Dan just said, and what you just said there as well, Martin, about cheating yourself if you were inclined to do that sort of thing. The only thing I can think of to say is that if I'm going to say it, I know we're supposed to not dwell on it too much in this episode, but if the coronavirus develops to a larger extent than Mr. Trump appears to hope it does, then it may be that the gentleman who said never, it's not going to happen, might find that the virus forces the issue.
May very well do. Leslie, come on. You and I took our tests a long time ago in the UK, but what?
I did actually. Honestly, do you want me to honestly? I think that it's going to change in any way. It doesn't matter. I've had people say to me, "No, don't worry about the internet. That's never going to work. I don't know what I'm doing." I've heard that. I've heard that. Yeah, the hobby would finish when they brought in SSB. Hey, technology changes. It will change no matter what. And either people sort of say, okay, we're going to adapt to this. We're going to see what new tools are these new tools we can use. How can we use these? And there will have to be adaptation to whatever situation, whatever people try and do. I have no problem with that. But it's not what people say. These things are going to happen in time.
Yeah, they certainly will. Now, Ruth, you're much younger than us old fogies. What do you think? Is this something's happening in your country, or one part of your country? What do you think should happen?
Yeah, I really think that remote testing really makes a lot of sense. There's only so many VEs, and testing dates are limited. And especially nowadays, if people are studying for an exam, but there's no testing session to go to, that's really frustrating. And especially because more people are home, maybe you're going to have more time to study for your license, and you actually have, hey, I have 2 weeks at home. I'm going to do this and get my license, but then they find out that they can't test, so they lose momentum. We could lose people who want to be involved in the hobby but just can't take the test. You guys pretty much covered most of it, definitely in terms of cheating-wise. But my opinion is if schools are able to do remote classes and reasonable exam proctoring, then I think it makes complete sense for a hobby like amateur radio to be able to figure out how to do this as well, so we can get more people licensed.
You're right, Ruth. And there's always going to be somebody who tries to cheat. It's a fact of life. We're never going to eliminate it totally. We will think of ways to stop people doing it, and somebody clever will come up with an idea. So we will always be working one step behind. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't offer a service that is right for the public. So, I think, as long as we do our best to control it, that's good. Okay, well, I got the next news story. The WIA down in Australia has a board comment. And this is kind of strange. Well, not strange, but around the world, various countries, including the UK, have ways of identifying where the amateur is via zones. So in the States, like in Australia, you have numbers, and depending on what number, should be, and I emphasise should be because I'm guilty of not being, you should be in a zone for that area. In the UK, we prefix with the country code because the UK is United Kingdom, so we have Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland, that is Isle of Man, and the Channel Islands. So we have lots of other prefixes that can be added in there. Okay, Leslie, what do you think on this one?
Well, does it really matter? I mean, if somebody comes up with a call sign, I go straight online and go, oh, there they are. That's the way we do it today. Does it really matter anymore? That's the question I would put. Like I said, you just go on the internet and you find where they are pretty much instantly. Yeah, in the UK, we have the prefix we have to change. I mean, when I was in Jersey, I used GJ. And other parts of the country, you know, GW or GM, exactly like you've said. Why do we do this? Can't we just, you know, go with the times, same as before?
Yeah, I think, though, it's interesting because, you know, you certainly, if you hear a GM calling, for argument's sake, I know he's in Scotland. So that's, you know, I would get more excited, especially if I was on 2 meters high. However, being an M call sign, the number of people who come back to me on and over and go, GM1MRB, and I go, no, I'm not a Scottish station. But they do it. Because I'm not a G, that really throws them sometimes. But yeah. Dan, we're guilty of having the wrong number with our call signs, aren't we, for where we live?
Oh, yeah. If I wouldn't be KB6NU if we didn't have that capability here. I'm in Michigan, which is in the 8th call sign district. And you know, there's actually a kind of an interesting reason for the way it developed here in the U.S. If we got a bit of time, the number corresponded to the FCC office for that area. So, for example, you know, the 8th call district comprises Michigan, Ohio, and West Virginia. And the reason it was set up that way is because the FCC office for those 3 states was located in Detroit. And, you know, the same with all the other ones. So in those areas, there was an FCC office that was responsible for those states. And here's another actually little interesting factoid. When they first set this up in the U.S., there was no 0 call district. It was just 1 through 9. And then I guess population grew, and they split off the 0 call district from the 9th call district. So some folks, and I knew one guy who he's a silent key now, but who actually was a 9, but lived in the 0 call district. And I don't know, just kind of an amusing thing.
Yeah, well, I got W9 ICQ as my call sign when I come over to the States. And I'm registered at your address, which is an 8. So
yeah. But that's a vanity call sign, right?
It's definitely a vanity call sign. I didn't like the one that the FCC issued me particularly, and I thought, let's do it. Let's do it as a vanity call sign for the podcast. So that's why I went. I had the option of a couple of others of ICQs. I decided 0. I didn't want 0, and I think there was one other number, but I wanted a W, so that suited me quite nicely.
Okay.
But yeah. So Ruth, you being new to the hobby compared with us old fogies, does it make a difference? Oh, in all honesty.
I don't really know. I mean, it's something I've definitely been thinking about because it's definitely a personal thing, and I really understand both points of view. I can kind of come at it from both ways. I mean, personally, I haven't decided one way or the other what I think because I still have my 4 call because I got licensed in Georgia and I lived there half the year for my co-op job. And then my permanent address is in Virginia, which is still in the 4 call area. But I also go to Kettering University in Michigan, which is in the 8 call area. So for me, like, I'm keeping my call sign at least until I finish college and then kind of decide if I want based on where I move after college, if I want to keep it or not. And it's hard because personally, I think I sort of lean towards I kind of like knowing where you are based on your call sign. But people get really cool call signs, and it's based on the number, and I'm like, okay, that's really fun. And like, I have a friend who's a writer, and his call sign is WR1TR, but he lives in Georgia. But that's the super cool call sign for what he does. Or for me, I'm not sure I want to totally change my call sign if I move out of the Southeast, because a fair number of people know me by my call sign, and I feel like it'd make things more complicated if I changed. So it's definitely an interesting question and something I'm thinking about myself as well. But one way or the other, we'll figure out who you are and where you live, because like someone else said, we can just look you up online or straight out ask, what call area do you live in? So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it certainly is. I find it strange that in the UK, the way the licensing system works now, you end up with a foundation license, an intermediate license, and a full license, and they're 3 different call signs. All right, I went straight to full because that's all there was when I did mine. But there used to be the numbers in the UK denoted the type of license you've got, and I kind of like my M1, and I'll be honest with you, M1s originally were people who hadn't done Morse and didn't have HF privileges, but you know what? There ain't many of us about, so when there was an opportunity to upgrade to an M0, I declined, like you, Ruth, because I feel that my call sign is part of me, and I want to keep it. My US call sign's slightly different because it was done for a reason. It was done for the podcast, so we decided to go for a vanity call sign in the States.
Understandable, yeah. And it's definitely, yeah, I feel like that'd be the same way if I get a call sign in a different country. Like, I've considered testing for the Canadian license. Probably will happen after college at this point. But I've considered that, and if I do that, I don't really care what area I get. I'm just going to go what number I can get and go from there. So it's definitely varies, I think, based on like home country or getting a secondary call sign for a different country. It's just kind of fun.
Yeah, it is. And as I say, some people collect call signs all around the world. I know the Cyprus boys many years ago were trying to convince me that if I paid £35 a year, I could have a Cypriot license and be a 5B4, which was interesting until I realised that I can go operate in Cyprus for up to 3 months by just putting 5B in front of my call sign, and it cost me nothing. And since I was only going to be out there 2 weeks of the year at best, it just seemed an overkill. But
was that under the CEPT rules, Martin?
I believe so. About 10 years ago, the boys told me it's dead easy. All you have to do is show your UK licence and fill in the forms.
Yeah. And
they'll give you a 5B4. And yeah, it sort of got excited about it. And then I thought, hang on a minute, it's £35 a year for nothing, really. So I will give you that 5B. It does make a lot of people come back to you when you're on the island. Having the US call sign is only ever any use for me when I'm in the States, because I can't use it outside the States because I'm not a US citizen. But hey, it's fun, and I think the Australians not having to change their call sign, I think it's a good thing in some ways, because it does denote who the person is. So yeah, so that's where we are on that one. Bit long-winded, but hey hum, it's a good one. Now, do you need to try a new hobby? How about trying amateur radio? Well, KTVO TV News did a report of a group that have been running training courses and trying to get people into our hobby. Edmund, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, well, but it's sort of preaching to the converted, because we're already in the hobby, aren't we, Martin? But it's, I suppose, a good time, given what's going on in the world at the moment, to have amateur radio up your sleeve. And yes, okay, if you get involved with emergency communications, it's very unlikely that you would be handling life or death stuff ever, but the fact that you can pass certain communications using amateur radio of perhaps, shall we say, the less important type means that you're then freeing up the infrastructure and the personnel to pass the life or death stuff on other systems. So especially given everything that's happened in the world since the beginning of 2020, it's a good hobby to be getting into, isn't it, Martin?
Yeah, it sure is. And I've had the opportunity to operate a bit more recently, mainly from the works of QTH, or driving to and from work. And there seems to be a lot of activity on at the moment, so it is good. It is good there. Sorry, Ruth, would you want to go next on this one?
Sure. I mean, like I always say, it's always great to hear about mainstream media that's covering amateur radio. It's always fun to hear about different clubs that are doing things and news reporters that are reporting accurately on amateur radio. And hopefully, if people are home and heard about it, maybe they'll consider it. Kind of ties in pretty well with the story about the testing of not quite sure how they would get their test, do the test right now. But hopefully, if it'll maybe pique someone's interest and at least get them looking into the hobby so we can get more folks on the air.
Yeah, well, I must admit, sitting at work with an antenna on top of my car, an HF antenna on top of my car, has generated quite a bit of interest. And people have come over, what you're doing. So I think our biggest problem is that people don't know about this stuff. And if they get to see it in operation and they get to talk to us, and we're all ambassadors for our hobby, then more people will get excited.
Oh, definitely. That personal connection is huge.
Yeah, so it's showing interest and talking to them generates interest, I suggest. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, so I think those of us who are involved with clubs and teaching classes should take this as a PR lesson. So somehow the television station had to have found out about the class and then decided to put it on the air. And probably what happened, I'm going to take a wild guess here, is that the club put out a press release. And these are documents, you can make them. In the old days, we just sent letters to press, but now we can send emails. And that sort of are typed up and have all the relevant information so that it would generate some interest in the news organization. And I'll go take this a step further and say, if any club out there is having a class and wants to get a little bit more publicity, I'd be happy to help you with your press release. So you can contact me by email and I'll help you with your press release. I've written bunches of these things and I've read thousands of them over the years. So I think I can probably come up with a good press release for you.
Well, there you go. That's an offer that people can't refuse. And that's good, Dan. And just out of interest, I was listening to the BBC local radio station about 7 weeks ago. And they were asking people to send in any music they do, podcasts. Out of interest, I sent one of our podcasts in for them to see what they thought. I've had no feedback. They said they'd listen to everything. I've had no feedback from the BBC. Kind of didn't expect to get it because A, we're niche, B, the podcast was kind of long, and I think that's probably why they didn't really come back to me. But it's all a matter of getting our hobby publicity, and that's what I really did it for.
Right. And they may not have done it this time, but maybe if they do it again, you send it to them again, they'll do it the second time. It's that kind of thing. You have to keep at it, is what I'm getting at.
Certainly. And we keep submitting these things. More and more people know about us. I know we get paid out on certain repeaters around the world. I believe there is a radio station that hopefully still does, but always used to down in Tasmania, play us out on one of their night services. So, you know, it's a possibility these things happen, and in fairness, it's all about keeping the word out there about this great hobby.
Yep.
Leslie, last words on this one?
Yeah, well, I've been listening to the conversation with interest, and the phrase that come out of that was ambassador for the hobby. That is so important. It's just what they're doing, you know, is getting the word out there. Some people aren't going to like it, you know, and some people are going to get really interested, and and that's what happened to me when I was 15. There was a local radio fete, and they had a special event station, and I've been with the hobby ever since. There is something to do with the BBC. There was a BBC reporter did something, and I can't remember the details of that, but I will try and dig that out for you, Martin. So back to you.
Yeah, no problems at all. I know Essex Hams do a lot with BBC Radio Essex, and I sent it off to BBC London, and I'm not knocking them. I wasn't expecting to get anything back, but if they sent us back a critique, yeah, I'd listen, because there's always ways of improving. Moving to our next news story, the Fairlawn Amateur Radio Society over there in New Jersey, I believe they are doing daily health and welfare broadcasts. So I think these are probably nets. The Fairlawn Amateur Radio Society does a lot with Morse, and it looks like some 2-meter stuff going on as well. So that's all good news at these times when people are sitting at home. And I'm often in contact with Ed from the Fairlawn Amateur Radio Society, so it's good to see that your members are doing something really interesting, Ed. Dan, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. Yeah, this is great. We're actually doing something similar here in Ann Arbor. We're having what we're calling the shut-in nets, and actually 3 times a day, which may be a little bit too much, but 3 times a day we congregate on our repeaters and just talk to each other. You know, give a little reports on how things are going at the stores and such as that. The 2 p.m., and that's 2 p.m. Eastern time, is on DMR, on our DMR repeater. And I'd like to invite anyone who's listening to join us on it. It's the Brandmeister Talk Group 3126, and that's the Michigan State Talk Group, actually. And it's a great little roundtable. So, yeah, kudos to Fairlawn for doing it, and I think all the clubs should be doing it.
Right, and you said that's Talk Group 3126, and I assume that's 2 p.m. local time for you, Dan.
Right, so that'll be 1800 Zulu.
1800 Zulu. Now, I have worked you once on the DMR. I might try again another time, Dan.
Yeah, we do it. We do it every day. So whenever, if you're available, just give us a shout. The guys would love to hear from you.
Yeah, well, let's see what I can do. Right, Edmund, do you want to go next on this one?
Yes, this is exactly the sort of thing that amateur radio clubs should be doing. So I would encourage anybody, even if normally they don't touch VHF, UHF with a barge pole, let alone repeaters. Even if that's you, get a handheld and just keep an ear on your local one, because not only will you probably get nets forming along these lines, you might also get operators pop up at other times as well, who normally you just wouldn't hear. For example, listening to my local repeater, GB3WO in Worthing, today, this morning, I heard the call sign of somebody who I probably haven't heard for about 7 or 8 years. I actually thought he might have gone silent key, but he's out there alive and kicking. Heard him for the first time in 7 or 8 years. This evening, a chap came up from several miles away who has been quarantined at home, and to pass the time has home brewed a 2 meter, 70 centimeter collinear flower pot antenna to pass the time of day, and he was testing it out this evening. So I thought I knew pretty much everybody locally who was active on VHF and UHF, and then lo and behold, a new call sign I'd never heard before, and it was a G1 station, so it wasn't a newly licensed person either, by any means. So keep your ears out on your local repeater, and also on HF. 80 metres seems to be a very popular choice at the moment, even during the middle of the day. And why not? The local Worthing Club is running a net every evening, 6 o'clock local time, I think it is, on about 3712, something like that, plus or minus. And Callum M0MNG, Mr. DX Commander, is running a net for people who are over 65 and quarantined, I think it is, on 80 metres at 11 o'clock in the morning on 3780. So if you're around for that, might be worth tuning in as well. But this is exactly the kind of thing that amateur radio clubs should be doing, looking after their members, looking out for each other, and getting some activity on the air as a bonus as well. So I encourage all the clubs out there listening to start doing this kind of thing, if indeed they aren't doing it already. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, no problems at all, Edmund, and that's good. Now, Ruth, you're finished your college early this week. Are you planning to spend more time on the air and maybe join some of these nets?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I just finished my work term early and have a couple weeks off, so I am greatly looking forward to getting on, finding some of these nets, hopefully in the local area, as well as by Echolink or DMR, and getting involved. I mean, like others have said, I think it's a great idea. Want to stay connected any way we can, and since we're all home, might as well get some nets together and get chatting. And especially, like Dan was saying, how they have the net with DMR or whatnot. If you've never done that before, you can try a different mode of communication since you're home and hopefully have the time. So yes, I definitely am hoping to get on some of these nets moving forward.
Right, well, it sounds good to me, and I can confirm there's a lot of our radio activity during the day myself, because I've been operating while I've been at work. Naughty boy, I know, but been doing it while I've been at work. Leslie, what have you been up to on this? What do you think?
There's a phrase Ruth come out with, and it's about staying connected, and I think that is so important at these times. She's absolutely right. Our local club, Golf X-Ray 2 Hotel Romeo, the Silverthorne Radio Club, we're doing a similar thing on the local OY repeater, and we had a net on Friday, and I'm sure that we've never had such a big net with so many people turn up, and it was very, very good indeed. Apologies to the repeater keeper there, but VHF and UHF is very busy here at the moment.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Dave Dawson will be quite pleased you're using his repeater. Hi. And so I'm trying to remember Dave's call sign, G7 something, and I apologise, Dave, long time since I've worked with you. But, yeah, as a matter of fact, I think we just need to keep chatting. It'll pass the time, and it'll engage our brains, so that's good. Last news story, and this was kind of really just to throw the hand grenade in the room for Dan, because I know there's an errata to the 2024 Amateur Extra Class question pool. Dan, what do you think?
Well, I can't really fault them too much for these mistakes. I make similar mistakes when I publish my study guide, so I can't jump on them too much. But a lot, I've spoken to them about this. I think they could have avoided a lot of these mistakes if they'd had somebody copy edit the questions and answers. And it seems to me that we have some copy editors at the ARRL, some technical copy editors, experienced with technical material that could probably do a bang-up job on it, and we could avoid some of these errors.
Yeah. Well, as I say, we were talking about this earlier, and there are some things you were saying were more sort of style, but just in the Google Docs I'm looking at, there are 4 or 5 typos within half a page of paper. So, yeah, you're right. It's kind of, okay, we'll forgive you, Dan, because you're on your own. But when you've got a whole organisation behind you, you think that more than one person would look at this, wouldn't you?
Well, actually, that's the thing about it. And I don't know if I'm letting in people in on secrets here, but the NCVEC really is not that big of an organization. The question pool committee consists of 5 people. And I tell you the truth, I don't even know how active all those 5 are. So it really is, these question pools are mostly the work of one fellow. And, to me, if it was me doing that, I would, be looking for professional help copy editing. That's what I'm used to as a professional writer. And let me put it this way. The technical editing I get makes me look better because it makes me look like a better writer. They find all the errors, they make the writing consistent, and that's what you really want. So I'm going to suggest it to them again that they get some, that they think about the process of putting out these question pools, and that process should include a copy editing step.
Yeah, makes sense, Dan. Makes sense. Well, Ruth, you and I don't have to do this exam again. But what do you think about it, Ruth? Would it have annoyed you if you were taking your extra at this point in time?
Yes, I think this definitely probably would have annoyed me if I was taking the extra exam and had found a lot of errors. Tend to agree with a lot of what Dan said, so not sure what else I can add here, but I agree that a technical writer or looking over something can only make it better. For me as an individual, just one person, when I'm doing like scholarship applications, I have multiple people look at it because there's so many times someone else has found an error that I've made that I thought I wrote it right and I just missed it multiple times. So not entirely sure what they'll actually do to fix it, but hopefully they can figure something out, and hopefully the next question pool will have less errors and whatnot.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ruth. It does help if you get it right. And I'm guilty of it as well. I've run things through spell checker. I've used Grammarly, and then published an internet post on Facebook about amateur RAM radio instead of ham radio. So I just didn't spot it, but it is annoying, as you say. Edmund, have you got any thoughts on this one?
Well, the good news is that none of these corrections fundamentally alter the meaning of any of the questions, but having said that, I do agree with what's been said already, that for spelling mistakes and small letters to appear where capital letters should appear, things like that, it would have been better if that could have been spotted and ironed out first time round, really.
Certainly would. Leslie, you get the last word on this one.
What can I say, Martin? It's the trouble is, I appreciate where they're coming from because they're probably a volunteer organisation, and you in reality get 1 or 2 people doing this. I'm not being horrible or anything like that, but that's the reality. You get volunteers. I've done this myself, and I've also had people scrutinise my work and pointing these things out. So my sympathies are with them. Even sometimes when spell checkers or Grammarly doesn't always pick it up. And engineering wise, it needs to be, things have to be absolutely spot on. It can make a huge difference in your answer if something is slightly off. Ruth would understand this, having a science background. Things like I'll give you one example, like a capital M and a lowercase m, things like that. But yeah, I do think that things need to be tightened up a bit. Now, capital M is mega, small m is milli.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And oddly enough, the small k is kilo.
Yes, the big M's Kelvin, I think,
Yeah.
off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth.
So you're far cleverer than me. That's fine. I don't have a problem.
Do you know how long ago I did this stuff?
I'm just prepping to take thermodynamics next term and fully expecting to have to switch between between Fahrenheit and Celsius and Kelvin a bunch of times. So
Don't do this to me, Ruth.
Yeah. Oh dear. It's a long time ago, Ruth. Long time ago for me, anyway. But yeah. So that's the end of our news stories. Let's find out what you've been up to. And I'm going to put him on the spot first again. Come on, Leslie. What have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, what I've been doing is I've had quite a lot of time to myself, as you can appreciate. What I've been doing is continually building that 49er kit, which is there's a bit to it, but we're just plodding away at it, trying to make sure all the components are in the right place. I did figure out my soldering wasn't as good when I started, but I have improved it now. It was horrible, and I wasn't happy with it initially, but improved on that. And obviously, there's been a lot of VHF and UHF activity here, so it's basically getting the equipment up and running, digging the stuff out of the cupboard. Where did I put the 4-meter antenna and all that type of stuff? So that's what we've been doing, Martin.
Yeah, well, it sounds interesting to me. And you talk about soldering, and you said your soldering wasn't as good. I remember, and there is a point to this, I remember my art master saying that on my school report, this child should not be allowed a pencil and paper because I was terrible at art. But I've watched a number of YouTube videos over the last year or so, and people soldering. I would be ashamed to solder and have it videoed the way they're soldering. Some of the people that solder on YouTube, you know, it's just a big dob of solder on the end of the iron and they blob it on. They do.
I know exactly what you mean.
They do, Leslie. That's the problem.
I know.
I'm thinking, you know, if you don't know how to do something, you shouldn't be doing instructional videos. But it does hurt me sometimes. I watch some of these videos, and often they're very good, but the odd one or two, and you look at it and you think, you really haven't got a clue how this works, have you? But anyway, that's enough of me. Round to Edmund. What do you think, Edmund? What have you been up to?
Well, for about a week I've been working from home. We're not self-isolating in the Mike November Golf household, but the decision was taken a week ago that everybody in my office was to work from home. So that means I've had a little bit more time to switch the HF radio on. And for the last week or so, 40 metres has been quite full of signals a lot of the time, and some of them have been very strong. Towards the end of last year, it seemed like every time I turned on 40 metres, the band was either completely empty or there was just one or two really weak-sounding SSB signals. But certainly in the last week, there have been many 5 and 9 signals on the band, and some of them up to about 40 or 60 dB over. The band from my location, right on the south coast, always used to have a lot of Italians on it during the day. Over the last week, it's got lots of Italians, lots of Spanish people, and to a lesser extent, a few French stations as well. And I guess it's not a coincidence that those languages correspond with the 3 countries that are the most severely locked down in Europe. So if you fancy practicing your Italian, your Spanish or your French, then 40 metres during the day is a good place to head to. In other news, you might know that I'm involved with the permanent special event station at Amberley Museum. Call sign up there, Golf Bravo 2 Charlie Papa Mike. The museum took the decision, understandably, last week to close its doors both to visitors and to volunteers as well. So we don't have the possibility of accessing the site to put GB2CPM onto the airwaves. I understand that Ofcom either just have or are planning to relax the rules around special event stations insofar as removing the requirement for the special event to be visitable by the public. But even if that is true, in the case of us at the museum, it wouldn't help, because the other condition, you have to operate the special event station from a specific named location. We would fail on that front as well, by virtue of the museum being locked to everybody. So what we are doing, or perhaps I should be more specific and say what I am doing, the Amberley Museum Radio Group, as well as operating that permanent special event station, also has a club call sign, which is Golf X-Ray 3 Whiskey Mike Uniform, GX3WMU. Until last weekend, that had never been used on the air, and certainly not in a CQ call. We used it very occasionally for testing, low power tests on site into dummy loads, that kind of thing. But it had never been used as a proper quote-unquote call sign on the air. So because club call signs aren't subject to the same restrictions as special event stations, we have decided that all the time the museum stays closed, I will use that club call sign to promote the museum and the special event station, and to keep Amberley Museum getting mentioned on the air periodically. So I've worked, I think, about my first 10 stations, all of them on 40 metres, and because it's a rare call sign and because it's a club call sign, it has been very well received by everybody who's worked it. So the reason I'm telling you all of this, apart from promoting the venue, obviously, is to suggest to people who are involved with special event stations that if for coronavirus reasons their special event station can't go ahead, if they have got a club call sign available, then it might be a good idea to consider using that instead, because there are a lot of radio amateurs at home at the moment who wouldn't be otherwise. And if you've got a club call sign rather than just a run-of-the-mill ordinary call sign, that will still attract more interest and attention on the air. Maybe not quite as much as a GB special event call sign, but it will still be something that people want to go for. So that's what I'm doing and will be doing. And if you hear any club call signs on the air over the next few months, then I would encourage you to try to work them.
Yeah, that's good, mate. That's good. So all copied and understood. Dan, what have you been up to? Much writing and blogging, I would guess, but what else?
Well, so it actually has a little bit to do with writing. I do a little bit of blogging for one of the two-way radio companies here in the States, and they sent me a radio, the Vero VR-N7500, and it's a dual-band VHF-UHF radio. But the unique thing about this radio is that it really has no front panel. There's just a couple of LEDs on the front panel, and you program it and use it via an Android app that runs on anything that has a Bluetooth interface. So I've been playing around with that. It's kind of amusing. I actually had an old Android telephone that really I had no use for anymore, except that it runs Android. And I was able to download the app on that. And so now I'm using that old telephone, obsolete telephone, as my Android front end for this radio. And the radio is capable of a lot of different things. Like you can use Bluetooth microphones and speakers with it. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I looked at. I think I looked at it, that particular one, when it came out, and not having one, and I looked at the software, and I suppose I lost interest because I couldn't do anything on without a unit and the software down. But it looks an interesting device because, as you say, it has no head panel. Effectively, it is a tablet or a phone that controls the radio. So that's interesting that you've got one and been playing with one, Dan.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I guess these erratas are also going to give you some changes to your book.
Yeah, so that I've been doing that. One other thing, I'll just echo what Edmund said about band activity. Band activity here on 40 meters and 80 meters has been a lot more active than usual, which, if there's a silver lining in all this, that's maybe one of them.
Certainly is. So, okay, Ruth, what have you been up to since we last spoke to you? Because we missed you last time, and you were doing some Girl Scouts, weren't you?
Yes, that's the biggest thing I've done in the last couple of months. So back at the end of February, kind of like you guys covered it some in the last episode, but I helped volunteer at a girls' STEM club located near where my co-op job is. So they reached out to the local club that I'm a part of, and a bunch of us got together to help introduce all these girls, elementary, middle, and high school, to amateur radio. So we had a lot of fun introducing them to all different parts of the hobby, and I specifically was thrilled to demonstrate satellite contacts to them. I was even able to help a few of them get on the air using my call sign, which they really enjoyed. So that was a lot of fun, very inspiring to see a lot of them interested in just STEM-related fields, but also just really interested in what we were doing with amateur radio. We had a bunch of different stations set up. We got to get the girls on their local repeater. We showed them Morse code. We did satellites. We did HF. We had Go boxes. It was a lot of fun. Since then, I really haven't done too much. I was super busy the last month with my co-op job, trying to finish that up for that particular work term, trying to get that done. But now that I'm home on break for the next couple weeks, and then I will continue being home because my classes are going to be online for at least the next month. So I'll be home for the next month and a half, and I'll have more time to get on the air and check out some of this band activity, which I know has been up. So looking forward to getting back on HF and satellites and stuff now that I have a little bit more time.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And let's say, enjoy the radios. You do. Well, from my point of view, not a lot apart from I am operating far more than I normally do. I'm supposedly a key worker because at the moment I'm contracting to the railway, and it's quite strange. I'm at a remote station miles from anywhere that have not got any trains running, but there's a bus replacement, and there's not that many people catch the bus replacement, so I need something to do. Hi. So, I've been playing amateur radio. I did think, 40 metres. I really should do 40 metres. So I sat down, took all the gear in, and I tend to run QRP. I've got an ICOM 703, so 10 watts. So I took the 40 metre antennas in, put them on top of the car, sat outside the station, and listened to the whole of the band being absolutely crippled because of the internet coming into the building, broadband internet over the phone line. It just wiped out the whole of the 40 metre band where I had to park. So that was day one ruined. But after that, I've had reasonable success on 20 metres. I worked down into Sicily the other day from South England on 10 watts. This morning I worked Spain and Czechoslovakia. So all in all, running 10 watts. So even if you QRP, there are stations out there that will hear you if you participate and you keep trying. They will hear you eventually. So don't give up if you only have low power. People are listening. I've also spent a fair amount of time on on the repeaters and VHF work. Had some really good conversations with people at the moment that are very chatty, which is quite fun. And it certainly breaks up my time travelling to and from work, so that's good. And all in all, apart from one other thing where I joined a 4-metre net on the way home the other night, joined a 4-metre net and done that. So I've been on 274, 20 metres, so a fair amount of operating from me, really. So it just proves, and even if you're running low power, there are people out there that are going to work you. So all in all, I'd like to thank you guys for joining us. I'd like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB.
Thank you, Martin. It's been a blast.
It's been great to have you, Leslie. I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG.
Thanks for having me on, Martin.
Okay, mate, no problems at all. Also, from the other side of the pond, I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU.
Thanks, you.
Yeah, good to have you, Dan, and always a pleasure. And last but not least, and we're not forgetting about you, Ruth, we have Ruth Willet, KM4LAO. Good to have you with us tonight, Ruth, and glad to have you back because you didn't make it last time.
Thanks, Martin. It's been great being on.
Yeah, and we'll do many more, I'm sure. So, thanks, guys, for joining me. I'd like to say 73s to you all. This is not the end of the podcast, just the end of this section. 73, guys.
7-3.
Cheerio.
7-3.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Hi everyone, welcome to News in Brief. This is Colin M6BOY. Dayton Hamvention obviously is called off now for 2020, but there still are awards and people to recognise in our hobby. So Amateur of the Year has been awarded to Yasu Zoro Mayawaza, Juliet Hotel 1 Alpha Juliet Tango. The Special Achievement Award goes to Jordan Shearer, Kilo November 4 Charlie Romeo Delta. The Technical Award has been shared by Steve Frankie, Kilo 9 Alpha November, and Bill Somerville, Golf 4 Whiskey Juliet Sierra, and the Nobel laureate Joe Taylor, Kilo 1 Juliet Tango. Club of the Year goes to the South Canadian Amateur Radio Society for their work there in Canada, obviously. So we'll put a link, obviously, for the full press release on this for you, so you can check this out. But congratulations to all those who have achieved success this year with their award. Now, the EU are looking at regulation that could seriously impact electronic hobbyists, obviously including us radio amateurs, in relation to VAT value-added tax or sales tax. Now, there's a amendment going through at the moment that says that EU custom rules from January 2021 will impose the possibility of declaring goods up to €150 with a declaration form, but this now might mean that you're going to be subject to more taxation. Now, as I say, there used to be a way of getting around things. We used to be able to say gift and $10 and you get things through the system. But it looks like now this is going to be abolished, and particularly in relation to shipments from China, where a lot of stuff is just shipped as a gift and low volume. So certainly something to keep an eye out for, as say going forward, and say that it might increase the shipping cost or the total cost of goods brought in from China into the EU in particular. But I would also expect this to pick up as well as a problem from shipping stuff from the US into Europe. Now we finish off with news that Ofcom has given 6 new community radio licenses. And these licenses have been awarded to Cheshire FM, Coast and County Radio, Cross Counties Radio, Elastic FM, Radio Scarborough, and last one, West Kent Radio. So say interesting that some new community stations will be coming on the air across the United Kingdom. Well, now we head over to our feature this episode, which is a feature discussing why does Coax fail. As always, guys, hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this episode's feature, I wanted to talk about why coax cable fails. Now there's many reasons for this, and I'm sure some of you can think of a lot more reasons than I've come up with. But I kind of tried to categorise this so that A, to make you think about it, or B, if you're new to the hobby, to get a better understanding of what's going on and to prolong the life of some of your patch cables and things like that. So there are various types of cable problems. Obviously mechanical problems are fairly large. You know, they can do all sorts of damage to a length of cable. And that's something that we've got to take very seriously in looking after our cable. Liquid ingress is the one that everybody would have probably thought I would have started with. And there are reasons why liquid ingress causes all sorts of problems. And you know, they're not easy to spot straight away, a liquid ingress problem. Wrong connectors. Now, once again, this is kind of why coax fails could be that you've put a patch lead on and your system's gone horribly wrong because you've used the wrong type of connectors. Certain plugs and certain types of cable can only work up to certain frequencies. So if I'm up at the high UHF end, you know, I shouldn't be using a PL259 because they have become lossy at that level. So if you're introducing loss into your system, it looks like a faulty cable, but it won't be. But it's something to worth considering is making sure you have the right connectors for the frequency you're using. Now heat. Heat's a problem. Yeah, the cable, if it overheats or for any reason, what will happen is it'll distort. And when it distorts, its impedance goes out. And as its impedance changes, that then creates all sorts of things like standing waves on the cable that also can cause you lots of problems. Now, high voltage breakdown. High voltage breakdown is another one that maybe some of us don't consider. You know, if you're a QRP operator, well, maybe you're not going to have that higher voltage on it. You're running 100 watts. Close. You'll have a few volts on the cable. I remember checking an FT690 Mark I many years ago on 6 meters and measuring the RF on 6 meters. And I believe there was something like 50 volts peak to peak voltage there. So, you know, even low power at 2.5 watts, you can have some high voltages. Now, if you start running a lot more power, potentially you could have some quite serious voltages on these cables. And if all goes well, you should be okay. But if there starts to be a problem, that's when you could actually have breakdown and break the dielectric insulation down, causing arcing going on inside the cable, which would certainly cause you lots of problems. So they're the types of problems we need to look out for. Now, going on to mechanical failure. All right, let's put liquid ingress first. Liquid ingress is probably our biggest problem. It can happen in a number of ways, either a split in the outer jacket and water gets into the cable, or you've got a connector that's managed to let water in. Maybe your self-amalgamating tape has died and broken up. And I've seen on recent self-amalgamating tape joints that some people are now wrapping them in electrical tape afterwards. So you wrap the joint in self-amalgamating tape to make it watertight, and then you give it extra protection by wrapping it in electrical tape afterwards, and that hopefully will help it not suffer ultraviolet light degrading the final product. So that's kind of what things to look out there. You know, ultraviolet light can make the jacket over a period of time go porous because plastic doesn't like ultraviolet light. And as I said, breaks in the outer jacket letting water in will cause you a problem. And the thing is, you can't go at it with a multimeter and go, yep, that measures ohms is out okay, because you have to realise that the current flows on the surface when you get at VHF and UHF, and HF as well, but when you're running radio frequencies, the current flows on the surface of the conductor, not within the conductor. So, just be aware of that. Pulling on connectors. Well, grabbing leads by connectors or giving a cable a tug with a connector, that's probably not a good idea. Because if you do that, you're potentially stretching the cable. Once again, that can cause interference by changing the cable's impedance. And once again, all the other problems kick in. But pulling cables, swinging mag mounts by their cable attached to them is not a good idea, although I've seen it many times. And the last one is snapping the inner connector on a length of coax by rolling the cable up wrong. I remember, and I was a newly licensed ham, and I went to roll up some cable for an amateur that I respect quite highly, and he went ballistic at me because I was rolling the cable up the wrong way. And if you think about it, when that cable comes off the drum, it has a certain amount of memory built into the cable, so that when you end up rolling it up, effectively, you ideally need to roll it up in the way that the cable wants to go. So as you roll a cable up, the easiest way is to roll it and loop it in the way that it's going naturally. If you try and go against the natural memory of the cable, that is when you're likely to start damaging the internals of the cable. So just a thought, rolling up. Now, wrong connectors. We talked about that earlier. You can get high SWR due to bad connectors. Now there are, and I was speaking to somebody on air the other day, and he was saying he had an antenna he couldn't SWR in, and we were talking about it, and I said, well, see if the connector is actually screwed up tight on the earth. And we give the cable a little tug, and the PL259 wasn't actually tightening right down. There are, occasionally you'll come across them, antennas with the SO238 socket on there, which is a different thread. So you also need the correct threaded connector, PL259. So whereas 99 times out of 100, they're the right connector, if you get one that just won't SWR up, you might have a bad connector, which will effectively look like a bad cable, and you'll spend ages looking for this bad cable when it's a connector and not screwing up properly. Yeah, too much loss in the cable due to using the wrong connectors or the wrong cable. Well, if you're building an antenna system and you've run your cable in, it may be nothing physically wrong with the cable, but it'll perform very badly. So we have to understand that, in fairness, use the best quality cable and connectors that you can afford. And there is an old story that says you spend 90% on your antenna system and 10% on your radio, and that's quite true. A bad feeder with losses in the feeder cable, even if it's a good piece of feeder, but it's not designed for the frequencies you're using, is costing you money. And it's spoiling your hobby, and you'll probably go, I don't know, this is rubbish, this radio, and give up. So what I will say is, do your homework on the cable first and make sure you get the best you can afford, because going cheap isn't always an advantage. Don't forget also that cable lengths can act as stubs, and I've seen this where you say get a multiple of a quarter wave or a half wave on a length of coax feeding an antenna, and it's not radiating particularly well. And then you go back to it and cut something like about a foot or 12 inches or so off the cable length, and all's fine. So you can end up with, in a silly situation where at the frequency you want to operate, you've effectively generated a stub, which will cause you real problems. Now, moving on to heat. Well, heat can affect the cable, as I said earlier. You don't want to run it too close to a heat source because, you don't want it burning. But if you're running your cable through a boiler house or back of a boiler, if you're warming it up, it may very well distort the dielectric inside. And if you distort the cable, you're going to end up with the cable going out of impedance and causing you all sorts of problems. And you'll be trying to chase down an SWR problem that wouldn't exist. Running too much power down a length of coax. Well, once again, I think I mentioned this earlier, if you run too much power down there, you may have high voltages. If you've got too high a voltage, it might break the coax down. And if you break the coax down, that's going to give you a major problem. And certainly, if you've got a high SWR and you're running too much current down, remember that voltage going down the line, when you've got the standing wave coming back, may add and be just enough to break the cable down. So make sure you check that. And we talked about heat damaging the impedance by mounting the dielectric. So high voltage power we talked about. Well, you've got to be very careful on this. Run too much power down with high voltage and you could have a problem. One of the things I have seen is by people running too much power down coax and there being a mismatch and flashovers within the interconnecting plugs and sockets. So PL259s and SO239s. I remember going to an amateur's house at one point in time, opening up his cables because he had all sorts of problems, and when I unscrewed them, there was all burning and arcing that had gone on with inside the connector. So with a bad connector or a cheap connector and running lots of power, you could get arcing, which once again is going to put a high resistance in there, which means it's going to arc again. And it's self-perpetuating and it creates a lot of problems, and you're likely to damage your rig, or in his case, his linear amplifier. So just a few tips. Coax is fairly well reliable, but we do have to be careful how we use it. The important thing is to treat it with respect, and you'll get a longevity out of its lifetime. If you swing your mag mount round your head on the length of coax, you don't expect it to last very long, and I've seen that done, unfortunately. I hope this was of interest.
Whether it's across the pond or over the channel, the ICQ podcast is international.
Herzlich willkommen in Deutschland. 73 de España.
By amateurs, for amateurs.
Well, thanks, Dad, for your feature, Why Coax Fails. And that certainly explains why there's always big barrels of coax at various rallies and events we go to. And maybe it's something to let our wives and partners know. That's why we come back with coax every time we go to rallies. Right, well, feedback now. 3 pieces of feedback from our listeners, very much appreciated, and all really regarding the same topics of clubs, not hubs, and what we're doing at this stage in terms of looking at the club infrastructure. And this is a worldwide issue. So we start off with Don, K4 Echo Alpha Echo, and he basically refers to the fact of moving the meetings on to local repeaters. So I know a lot of clubs are looking at us virtually and moving those to nets and meets it online, etc. So certainly very valid if you can't get people to the club, get them on the air and have your meetings on the air there, and certainly very relevant in these times that we're in. Clive Ramsey talks as well, sends a mail, no call sign for you, Clive, but you mentioned as well about the national organisations, and certainly doing a lot more in terms of bringing people on board and maybe try and embrace the CB culture, and also how to become a less male-dominated hobby. I'm sure you've heard a lot, Clive, about a lot of stuff we've been talking about recently in relation to different areas and different places to go to try and find people of different genders for the hobby, and how we can embrace the younger hams, including things like CBs. And I know that that's certainly a very popular one for you, of actually embracing the fact that all radio users are the same and not one, and amateurs are not better than CBers or vice versa. Richard G8 India Tango Bravo again also comes back to and said obviously that the information in regarding to grow, merge or disband your club video on YouTube, sadly a very topical subject. Too many clubs are top heavy with an older demographic and members in their 60s and upwards. Many have the if it's not a HF contest then I'm not interested mentality. Whereas new technologies like digital, VHF, FM and repeaters are dirty words. Too many have long-term committee members who view any form of change, modernisation or amalgamation of clubs as a direct challenge to their status. And so basically he's very pro towards the idea of, looking at this amalgamation hub idea of things. And again, he mentions, well, in terms of national organisations, to look at public relations and provisions of countering the image of that some clubs have and the hobby has in general. And certainly in these very unfortunate times, it's a great opportunity, I think, for clubs to promote themselves to their local press outlets about what they're doing to certainly help the hobby and help people in these worrying times. So, I mean, a collection of interesting feedbacks there from Richard, Clive, and Don Dad, and I mean, a lot of what we echo on the podcast here about moving forward and keeping things fresh and keeping things evolving in the hobby, really, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly is, Colin, certainly is. And in fairness, I know Richard very well, G8ICB. We often chat about all sorts of things, but there is a big movement in the hobby, and I'm sure we're going to hear more of this. We have to generate more interest, and we will be generating more interest, and we have to move with the times. So there are lots of things which some people won't be happy with, some people will, some won't be sure, but we'll give it a try. But we'll get there, Colin, because in the end of the day, it don't matter what it is. If you're enjoying your hobby, then you do that hobby. And we shouldn't be exclusive to amateur radio, at this podcast. If somebody who does CB or license-free radio or is a shortwave listener, you're more than welcome. We embrace you to be involved and listen to our product, and we would listen to you as well. So it's all about being positive in our hobby, Colin.
Very true, very true. And again, guys, I mean, look, hobby is all about learning, evolving and working together. So certainly, as I say, in terms of, getting involved in these ideas going forward, it certainly is something to take forward from there. Now, as always, we need to thank some very kind people. Our monthly subscription donors who continue to keep us advert free, along with Dean Sproul, Victor Echo 5, Sierra Papa Romeo. Thank you again for your donations. So anything you wish to send our way to show your value of the show and what you experienced this time, easiest way of doing that is visit icqpodcast.com/donate. And as I say, everything you send our way goes into paying our running costs for the show. While there is mentioned at the top of the show, all the information regarding the effects of COVID-19 virus is being posted to the ICQ podcast website, really just to try and keep this episode as free of it as possible for you, just to allow you to a bit of breathing space and more in hobby enjoyment. But we know there's a lot going on, so we're going to post that information directly to the website. So sign up for the free newsletter there, and that will keep you updated with the news stories that are going on. That gets mailed twice a week on a Wednesday and a Sunday, so we can keep you updated there. And obviously our Twitter handles are at M1MRB and at Colin Butler. The Facebook group as well is another place to find out information in the meantime. Now, as you probably all guys are aware now, Hamvention is cancelled for this year. But if you go along to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ICQ podcast, you can take, viewings of videos we made at Hamvention last year. So it'd be a case of, if you need your fix for Hamvention, feel free to pop along there and check out those videos in the meantime. Now, we have a change for the end of our show, Dad, don't we? Because Mum's not coming home from work anymore for a chocolate biscuit and cup of tea because she's now retired. So does that mean many cups of tea and many chocolate biscuits?
It very much seems so, Colin. Your mum officially retires today, although because of obvious reasons, her place of work's been shut down for the last week. So, yes, she says the chocolate biscuits have to remain, and when I'm home, I do make her lots of cups of tea because I work fairly close to the kitchen, and every now and again I feel that I need a brew, so I make her one when I make myself one. So at the moment, I'm Mrs. Butler's tea provider, and we do quite well out of it, and she's enjoying her time off at the moment. But it'd be nice to see her when I get home from work when I'm on late, rather than wait for her to come in another hour and a half later. So all in all, it's good to have her at home, Colin.
True. Well, look after now and look after yourself and everybody. We mentioned it's top of show, but look after yourself, your family and your club mates, etc. in these worrying times. And I'm sure, obviously, your ham radio instincts will kick in and you'll do your best for your communities, look after things. So I'm going to bid you guys all 73s, be safe. And we'll certainly catch you all again in a fortnight's time. 73s all.
Yeah, 73.